Okay, we are live. Hi, everybody. This is Gila Glassberg. I'm a registered dietitian and a certified intuitive eating counselor, and I'm doing a takeover on OK Clarity, and I'm really honored and privileged to be here. I'll wait a minute until people get on. I'll just wait like 1 minute. People could post their questions if they want. I have about 4 questions. There's more to there. It's not just like a one-line question. They're like, I guess, loaded questions, some of them. And I'm more than happy to answer questions if I have time. It's 6 o'clock now, and I'm gonna try to end by 6:30. And yeah, I'm actually just gonna start by introducing myself and what do I do. So I'm a registered dietitian, and just a little bit of background. I was working in the field of regular clinical nutrition in a nursing home for about 4 or 5 years before I started my private practice as an intuitive eating dietitian. And the reason why I ventured into a different field of nutrition or a different way of counseling, which is the intuitive eating model, is because I felt very much like I was the food police as a dietitian, and I really didn't want to do that. I struggled with disordered eating as a teen, well into my 20s. I didn't think it was disordered because I was a dietitian. I thought I was just eating healthy, but once I was introduced to the intuitive eating model by Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch, it just kind of clicked. So actually the first question is, can you please explain why intuitive eating doesn't equal eating whatever you want? So I feel like that's a good segue into like a more of an introduction to what intuitive eating is. So intuitive eating is a book. And if you want to buy it, please buy the 4th edition. They also have a workbook now. It's a book written by 2 registered dietitians, Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch. And it's more like a nutrition methodology. But if you wanted to get like if you wanted to just like get a intuitive eating 101, you could definitely read the book. So Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch were working in the field of, regular nutrition private practice, putting people on diets, or what maybe they were calling more like sensible meal plans, like just general healthy eating, right? And the client would come in and they would tell the dietitian what their goal weight was, and they would come up with some sort of a plan, goals, and they would maybe lose the weight, maybe not, but let's say they lost the weight and they felt amazing and they felt like on a high. And I'm sure many of you could relate to that feeling of like losing weight and I'm amazing and like I'm on top of the world, right? And but what they realized is that inevitably the clients would return. So whether it was 1 month later, or 1 year later, or 5 years later, all the weight that they had lost, they had gained back and probably more. And they were feeling, Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch were feeling like really confused. Like, why is it that, number one, like why do they gain the weight back? And why are they blaming themselves? Why is there so much of this like hatred, self-hatred, self-loathing, body loathing, body hatred? And so Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch, they look to the research, the like weight research and dieting research, and they really weren't able to find studies that showed that people who lost weight on a diet kept it off long-term meaning 5 years or more. So once they sort of did all that research, they decided, okay, so if dieting, quote unquote, doesn't work, so what does work? What was born out of their research is intuitive eating. So intuitive eating are 10 principles, and they're designed to help someone have a healthy relationship with food. So with intuitive eating, we don't focus on weight. And if you read the 1st edition of intuitive eating, which came out in the 1990s, you will see that there was more of a weight focus. And as the years went on, and they wrote the 4th edition, I think last summer or 2 summers ago, very updated, very research-based. It really took the focus off of weight and really just focused on healthy behaviors. And as Evelyn Tribole always says, weight is not a behavior. So what they found was that the more people dieted, the more they restricted, the more they felt crazy, out of control with food. They felt like so much body hatred. If they did lose weight, they always felt like they're going to gain it back. To the point that like they didn't want to go out. They didn't want to go to parties. They didn't want to go to simchas. They didn't want to go to anything. They didn't want to go out with friends because they felt like if they go out, then they're going to cheat on their diet, right? And I'm sure all of you could understand, like, or this resonates with you if you have dieted or chronically dieted or are still dieting. Like, why is it not working? Like, I'm trying so hard, I'm being so quote unquote good, and I'm just not losing weight. Or like, it's taking me so long to lose the weight, or once I lose the weight, I feel so out of control with food. Or even if I'm able to not eat the food, all I think about is food. So that's how intuitive eating came to be. And these are the 10 principles. I'll go over them quickly. But you don't have to go in any specific order, but I try to go in somewhat of an order, like for the beginning of working through it, and I'll explain why. And then I hope that this long introduction answers the first question. So the first principle is reject the diet mentality. And it's just really understanding that we live in a world that's literally obsessed with dieting. If you go to any Shabbos meal, at least for me, I see it all the time and I hear it from clients all the time. If you go to any Shabbos meal, if you're, at your child's sitter play, if you're walking on the street with friends, if you're out for dinner with friends, everyone is talking about dieting. I shouldn't eat that. I should eat that. I'm fat. I'm too fat. I'm too skinny. You're too fat. You're too skinny. Are you sure you want to eat that? Oh my God, pizza has way too many carbs. That's way too fattening for me, right? Like, I mean, give me a wave if you get what I'm saying, right? Like, and you'll notice it. Maybe this doesn't resonate with you, but you still will notice it. Like wherever you go, everybody is talking about dieting, and everybody thinks that weight loss is the most important thing in the entire world. And there's this thin ideal that in order to be pretty or liked or anything, then you need to be thin, right? So I tell this to clients all the time that like session 1 is not reject the diet mentality. It's like your whole life is a process of rejecting diet mentality, of like dismantling your beliefs that you were raised with, whether it was because you were put on a diet as a child, or you were called fat as a child, or you were told, whether it's directly or indirectly, maybe your mother was always looking in the mirror, always restricting, then binging, or just restricting, or talking about food all the time, right? That is your diet culture, and you have to actively work to reject it. And some people aren't ready for that. Like it's just sort of like a mindset, like, oh, I'm going to look out for that. Like how much of my head space do I want to be thinking about food? And I will be quoting a little bit of my supervisor, Jessica Setnick, who talks a lot about this. She is a real eating disorder expert, and she categorizes disordered eating as thinking about food more than what's regular. So let's say maybe it's normal to think about food 20% of your day because you have to go to the grocery store, you have to feed yourself, right? But if you're thinking about food 20 to 60% of your day, we could just automatically call that disordered because, right? Like I have clients, right, like sort of like a wheel, like a circle, and I have them fill in like all the important things in their life. And if they say that, yeah, they think about food or body image or how much they should be eating or shouldn't be eating 60% of their day, then they only have 40% left for their family, maybe their spouse, their kids, their job, their religion, right? So that's like, it's just like not how we want to be living our life. Is nutrition important? Of course. Is movement important? Of course. But there are other things that contribute to our health, like our mental health, right? We're here on OK Clarity, or sleep hygiene, right? Or even relationship health or financial health, right? So we've just become obsessed with like the ideal health is eating clean and moving a lot, right? So like obviously that's you can't minimize health to just those two things. Okay, so that's rejecting the diet mentality. Then there's these 3 principles I kind of lump together. Honor your hunger, respect your fullness, and the satisfaction factor of food. So this is maybe where people get confused also. So honor your hunger doesn't mean eat whenever you want, as much as you want. Honor your hunger is a way that we understand that we have hunger cues and we have fullness cues. And dieting very much turns off those cues because dieting tells us what to eat, when to eat, and how much to eat. So if we've been on a diet I've had clients on a diet for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and now they're trying to work on the intuitive eating model, and they're like, I don't really know when I'm hungry. I don't really know when I'm full, and I don't know what foods satisfy me because for like 10 years I've been told that like the only good foods are like cottage cheese and like apples and rice cakes. And I don't really know if I like, baby chicken because I was only allowed to have chicken breasts, right? So like just things like that. Like I don't really know if I like cream cheese because I was never allowed to have it because it's so high in fat, right? All these things so we get in touch with our hunger and our fullness. And that's also just like an important thing to think about, that like if you have kids or you're around kids, you see that like they kind of know when they're hungry and when they're full, but we interfere. Like we say, like, are you sure you're hungry? Are you sure that you're full? Like, have another bite. Or like, wow, you already had 2 pieces of potato cocoa. And I'm not saying that I will. There's a question here about kids. I'm not going to touch that right now. I'll go back to it. But I'm saying that like we want to empower our kids to know when they're hungry and when they're full. And we want to also empower our kids on what feels good in your body. So if you are working on intuitive eating after years of dieting, maybe that's why people get confused that it's eat whatever you want whenever you want. No, it's a process of understanding your hunger fullness with a hunger fullness scale. The scale is 0 to 10, 0 being like ravenous, like on a fast day. You haven't eaten anything for many hours, or 10 is like the most full that you could be. You might be stuffed, possibly nauseous, having to unbutton your pants, like Thanksgiving full, right? So that's the spectrum of 0 to 10. And so we teach people like how to understand that hunger and fullness is not objective, like diet culture will say that it is. Like, oh, like how could you be hungry at 10 o'clock at night, like if you ate all that protein, right? And then you're like, I'm so confused because I'm getting a hunger signal, like my stomach's growling or my head hurts. And then we have all these rules in our head, like you can't eat past 6 p.m. You're going to get so fat, like it's the worst time for you to eat, like all this noise in our head, and we don't even know when we're hungry, when we're full, and what food satisfy us. So I'm not going to go more into detail about those principles, but it's a detailed process. It's not just like eat whatever you want, whenever you want. Okay. So those are those 3 principles. Then I start to talk about self-care, which is not a principle, but it is a theme throughout the whole intuitive eating process. And the reason why I do that is because I want people to know that if you are not practicing adequate self-care. So first we do like the hunger, fullness, satisfaction. You're not eating enough. You're not eating foods that you like enough. You're not sleeping enough. You're not moving enough. You have unbalanced relationships. Like things are just out of whack, right? So like there's so many ways that we could use food to cope. And that's where it becomes more of like you might need something else besides for nutrition counseling. Like if every single time you get angry, you eat, whether it's an apple or cheesecake, is the apple or the cheesecake gonna help you through that anger, right? So it's not a bad thing to sometimes use food to help you through something. Like once in a while when you're feeling emotional and you just the easiest thing for you to do is to grab food. I totally get that, and there's nothing wrong with it when you do it sometimes. But the underlying problem is that you really don't have healthy coping mechanisms to cope with that anger, right? So that's where like a lot of the mental health counseling comes in. I'm not a mental health professional, but maybe, referring them to a therapist, or maybe just teaching them something that I've learned with some of my psychology books, and then referring them out, like trying to get the client to understand that this is not about the food. And that's really all eating disorders and disorder eating. It's never about the food. It's a symptom of something else. So whether you're using self-care in the way that you're numbing with food, you're by restricting, numbing on hunger, numbing on binging, numbing on just talking about food all the time, it becomes like this coping mechanism. So that's when we really try to understand, like, hey, maybe like what's your love language and how could you give that to yourself? Or what are things that you love to do and you never let yourself do? There's a lot of self-exploration through that process. And then we talk about the other principles that I call like the more like mental health principles, which are challenging the food police and not using food to cope with your emotions. So I always say that like until you understand what hunger and fullness and satisfaction feels like in your body, and you know that you have adequate self-care, so that might take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks before we get to the next principles, then let's talk about the food police, right? So if any of you have seen a CBT therapist, or you are a CBT therapist, you know the model of thoughts create feelings and feelings create behaviors. Therefore, we have to work on the thoughts and feelings and behaviors, right? So that's where like the automatic negative thoughts come in, like catastrophizing or black and white thinking or exceptionality. Like there are lots of categories of automatic negative thoughts, and then learning like to reframe it. So these automatic negative thoughts are usually these cognitive distortions. Like if I eat one cookie, then my whole world falls apart, right? So we really work on reframing those thoughts. Or like if we're really unhappy with the binging behavior or the restricting behavior, we have to go back to the feelings and the thoughts and learn to deal with them directly. And that's such a positive thing for people to learn. And clients have been blown away with the fact that when I tell them, now you know when you're hungry, and you know when you're full, and you know when you're satisfied, and you're practicing good self-care, and you notice that you're having a really uncomfortable feeling, like it's, like shame or anything that's hard, right? Anger, like, give me some examples of emotions. Like, I'm blinking right now, but like these heavy emotions that we're just like feeling, and we don't know how to deal with them. Like, whether it's because nobody taught us how to deal with them, or because we're just so afraid of them, and we learned as children to just like deal with it via food or any other unhealthy coping mechanism. So that's challenging the food police, and not using food to cope with your emotions, or now they call it coping with your emotions with kindness, is really understanding what emotions cause you to binge, right? So again, a lot of just plain moody, a lot of self-exploration there. Like, when I'm feeling, is it when I'm feeling angry, right? Is it when I got into a fight with my mother and I just don't know how to cope? She never taught me how to cope, or I just can't utilize those tools, or I never been to therapy. I don't know how to, right? So that's the basis of that principle. I only have 15 more minutes, so I better speed up. The other principles are respecting your body, gentle nutrition, and joyful movement, and then making peace with food. 4 more principles. So basically, I say that gentle nutrition and joyful movement are forms of self-respect, of body respect, and body respect is so important because the whole goal of that principle, at least the way that I see it, is to understand what your body can do for you outside of the way that it looks, right? So we're always relating to our bodies with the way that it looks, right? Like, I look good today, my hair looks good, my face looks good, my face looks bad, she looks good, she looks bad, right? Like, a lot of externals, which is not necessarily a bad thing. We live in a physical world. You're going to notice people's externals before you notice their internals, right? But basically, like, it's taking the focus off the way that we look. So, like, and not totally. Obviously, you have to make sure that you feel good about the way that you look, and make sure that you shower and have normal hygiene. I feel like that's where people also get confused. They're like, just eat whatever you want, and like, who cares about your body? Like, it's totally not like that. I think it's just hard to explain intuitive eating, even in 30 minutes. So I think that's why people might get confused. Okay, so respecting your body. So, like, let's say body gratitude, ways that you could respect your body: getting clothes that fit you. If you're wearing clothes that are too tight on you, you're literally getting a message all day that, like, you don't fit. And I always say that. It's on my Instagram. It's one of my posts. Or, like, this might sound like simple, but like, if your bra is too tight, if your underwear is too tight, right? Like, it's so uncomfortable to have like your undergarments too tight, and you're just like, well, you don't deserve to get new clothes, right? Because you're fat. That's horrible. That's like, who told us that? Like, and then we're passing that on to our kids. Like, until you lose weight, you shouldn't buy new underwear, and you should wear the tight stuff, and then that's going to motivate you to change. Does that? I wouldn't motivate me to change. I don't know about you. You could give me a wave if you think that would motivate you to change. I don't think so. And then gentle nutrition and joyful movement. Again, I think those are forms of body respect. Those are ways that we care for our body. So after all the other principles that I spoke about, maybe now you're ready to work on gentle nutrition and understand what foods feel good in your body. And I, as the dietitian, could explain to you what research says is good for you. But that doesn't mean that, you know what, I tell this to clients all the time. If you eat too many vegetables, you're going to be bloated, right? So that doesn't mean that you should eat vegetables all day. And if you eat too much fried food, you might be bloated, right? If you don't eat for 10 hours and then you eat a salad, that might also hurt your stomach. So there's really no good foods or bad foods. It's like getting the general nutrition knowledge. So many of my clients don't even need that nutrition knowledge. They heard everything and they're so confused, right? Like, one dietitian says bananas are great for you. They're full of potassium and they have carbs, and you need carbs for your day. And another dietitian will tell you, oh my God, bananas are poison. And I've actually heard clients tell me that, salmon is so good for you. Oh, don't eat it. It's too fattening and has too much mercury, right? Pizza is great for you. It has all the components. Oh my God, pizza is like the most fattening thing. Like, I don't know. I just hear this all the time, and it's so confusing. So, to answer this question, does it equal eating whatever you want? Of course it doesn't. It's really understanding hunger, fullness, satisfaction. Am I using food to cope? I know I'm going really fast, but I only have 11 more minutes. So I'll give you some resources at the end if you want to really delve into intuitive eating. And then making peace with food. So that's where people get confused about intuitive eating, because making peace with food is where you do allow yourself to eat with unconditional permission to eat. And Rena Reiser, who's also an intuitive eating counselor, taught me this, that like that principle should really be taught last, because first of all, once you do all the other principles, you might feel like you're ready to make peace with food and have unconditional permission to eat. But the point of that principle is really to habituate to food. So everything in our life that we have, like, when we get married or we get a new car or we have anything that's new, we're really, it's awesome, it's exciting, it's new, and then the novelty just wears off. And that's just the way life works, right? So if you're always on a diet and everything is on a pedestal, like pizza's on a pedestal, I'm never allowed to eat it, I'm addicted to pizza, right? And then you allow yourself to eat the pizza, you're like, oh my God, I had 4 slices and I'm a total food addict, okay, I'm never eating pizza again. And then we perpetuate that cycle. So I think that's where people think that intuitive eating is all about eat whatever you want, and it's for sure 100% not. And throughout my clients' journeys, I find that I teach them a lot of other life skills in general. Like, and I know this might sound dramatic, but I tell them like intuitive eating could lead to intuitive living. And again, because it's not about the food. So if you're obsessed with dieting, or you're restricting, or you're binging, or you're just talking about food all the time, right? Usually there's some underlying reason why you're doing that. And if we could like really pull that apart in my sessions, / I work with the therapists a lot, many times, then people's lives really change. And like, you don't have to believe me. You could ask some of my clients or group participants or anyone who's done intuitive eating. I know some people here have told me that intuitive eating has changed their life. It changed my life. So maybe it's a little out there, and maybe people think it's like a little bit woo-woo, like it doesn't really make sense. But like, I want you to know that there's so much research out there, and just in the intuitive eating book. So you don't have to think like, yes, it totally changed my life. You don't have to think like, okay, this is just crazy. Like, it's not black and white. You don't have to go from dieting to dieting to anti-dieting. You could just learn about it and see like what resonates with you and try certain things. And the whole point of intuitive eating is to practice self-care and self-compassion. And that doesn't mean like throwing your life away and eating whatever you want, staying in bed. So I don't know how that got so misportrayed in the media. Okay, so how to speak to children about healthy eating habits, especially when they're overweight. So actually, I personally don't like to categorize people as underweight, overweight, obese. BMI is such a poor indicator of health. It's your weight and your height, doesn't take into account any other things, right? And I think people are shifting there. But anyways, you use the word overweight, so I said that. Okay, so I only have 8 more minutes, so I'll go as fast as I can, and then I'll wrap up, and then maybe we'll do another live. There's a different feeding model when it comes to children. It's called the division of responsibility. And Ellen Satter created this feeding model. She's a dietitian and a social worker. And the basic premise is that the parent is in charge of the what, where, and when of eating, and the child decides how much and if any. So that means you're in charge of like when the child eats, what the child eats, and where the child eats, and then they decide how much they want to eat of it, and maybe they don't want to eat at all. You must offer your children food every hour and a half to 2 hours when they're like in the younger age range, and as they get older, you could start offering them food every 2 to 3 hours. Most adults get hungry every 2 to 3 hours. So you want them to feel secure that they will be offered food and they will have food that they like, but that you're not forcing them to eat it. And I'm just giving you like the basic guidelines, that there should always be a safe food on the table. So a safe food means that your child will accept that food. So let's say you're serving chicken and broccoli and sweet potatoes, and your child hates all those foods. Make sure that there's bread, or you could offer them yogurt or something like that. Now, the division of responsibility has shifted more to responsive feeding, which is also like very, very nuanced and complicated, and it's definitely not something that you could learn in 8 minutes. And it's something that I coach moms on to have a healthy feeding dynamic in the home. Like responsive feeding means you have to respond to the needs of your family. So I don't think Ellen Satter had 6 or more kids, and I have clients that have 6 or more kids, and you definitely have to know how to navigate, and it takes a lot of trial and error, and it also takes a lot of self-compassion and grace and letting things go, and remembering that even though you didn't know that 10 years ago when you had your first child, it's okay, and it might be hard to implement now, but you could definitely do some things. You don't have to, it's not black and white. So basically, this gives children autonomy over their eating, and it really helps get rid of that restrict, binge, restrict cycle of like the parent doesn't allow candy in the house, and they are those children that go to the kiddish at shul, or they go to a friend's house and they are binging on candy, and they feel so guilty about that. I've had so many people tell me that they were so restricted as kids, they found themselves stealing money or stealing food and feeling so much guilt and shame throughout their whole life, until they realized why they were doing that. And it's such a terrible thing. I'm not judging anyone. I'm just saying, like, it's such a hard thing for a kid to feel like, oh my God, I'm doing something terrible and wrong. And I'm not saying that kids should be stealing money or food. I'm just saying, like, it could get so bad. And I was just re-listening to Jessica Setnick's eating disorder boot camp, and she was saying that she's seen children scrape gum off of the sidewalk because they were so desperate for candy. So that's personally how I believe it's the gold standard of feeding. So that means if you are in charge of the what, where, and when of eating, and the question was with healthy eating habits, you want to offer a wide variety of foods often. So again, like, you could always offer fruits and vegetables at every meal. You could offer different types of proteins. You could, switch to whole grains and have the white grains available, and slowly maybe ask if you could give them half and half. Like, there's so many ways. There's so many creative ways. And the main thing I love all the division of responsibility, but if you wanted to start with something small, it's really about exposure to food. So what happens a lot is that, let's say, your child loves salmon, right? They love salmon. They eat it whenever you make it. They love sweet potatoes on broccoli. I'm just giving that example. And, every Tuesday night you make it, and, like, they love it. They devour it. They're like, 8 months, and then 1, and then they're 1.5, and then they're 2, and then 2, they throw it on the floor, and they will not eat it, right? Throw it on the floor, throw it on the floor, throw it on the floor. And mom gets really frustrated. Like, I am never serving this kid salmon. It's so expensive. And she just threw it on the floor, right? So what happens? Like, maybe you make salmon for yourself, but you give her fish sticks. And then that continues, right? And then by the time the child's 10, they're not going to try salmon. I mean, they might, but you definitely lower the chances of them trying salmon. And so that's why you always want to offer it and expose them to it. And every single thing is a win, right? So if the child lets you put the salmon on the table, it's a win if she didn't used to let you. If they let you put it on their plate, if they touch it, if they squeeze it with their hands, if they lick it with their tongue, if they smell it, those are all wins, right? And I give the example a lot. Like, I don't know if any of you like herring, but I definitely don't like herring, and I don't want to smell it. I don't want it near my food. Or you could think of any, like, funky type of food that you definitely do not want to eat. And imagine if, like, somebody was like, come on, just try it. And let's say the herring is touching my pizza, right? And you're like, oh my God, you don't have to eat the herring, just eat the pizza, right? I would be like, can you stop forcing me to eat a food that I literally am gagging from? So our kids who are not exposed to the foods that we're exposed to, they're little, they don't have the exposure that we have. Of course, they're going to feel turned off when somebody's forcing food on them, and they just don't have any autonomy, and that's like almost a sure way to make them never eat that food. And the way that I look at it is, you want to think about your child or yourself, long-term goals, right? Not short-term goals. When my child's 20 and out of my house and at somebody else's table, will they be nauseated by herring or salmon or chicken soup or any of those things? Or will they be able to tolerate it in the room? Or do they even like it now, right? So you have to think about it. And you could force salmon down their throat, but you're not really doing them any good. So that I only got to 2 questions, so I'm happy to come back on and answer the next 2 questions, although I do feel like a lot of what I said answered those questions. I'm just going to give a plug to my podcast. I have a podcast called Get Into It with Gila. Get into it of eating into it. You can find that on Spotify, and most of those episodes are also on my YouTube channel at Gila Glassberg, and on my website, gilaglassberg.com, where you could find so many episodes there. I also have many, many blog posts explaining a lot of the things that I just said, whether it's intuitive eating or division of responsibility. We're just talking about general diet culture, restricting, or weight loss surgery. All those things are available on my website. You could actually purchase classes on my website as well. Like, if you wanted to purchase a class on division of responsibility, or if you're familiar with the IFS model, internal family systems, I had somebody do that on me using talking about the intuitive eating model. She referred to her, so that was great. Okay, so I have to wrap up. You're more than welcome to email me your questions if you have more questions at gilaglassberg18@gmail.com. and I would love to do another live, or you'll just let me know. And yes, those are my resources that I wanted to share. And thank you guys so much for coming on. And I am going to end this live. Have a great night.